Before we begin, a quick update about the future of this series. From the next episode onwards, the rest of my journey along the Eagle's Nest Trail will be released on Rumble. You'll find my Brit Poland channel linked in the description and the pinned comment below. The trail certainly isn't ending here, and I really hope you'll join me there for the rest of the journey. Alright, so welcome to day 4 of the journey, and it's been a journey certainly. Yesterday was about 45,000 steps. It was crossing over some interesting mountain peaks. You know, nothing crazy compared to the mountains in Poland I've seen, but certainly taxing. Saw some absolutely incredible natural sights, and I have my Make Gdynia Great hat with me today, which has been a lifesaver on this trip. It was also my dad's hat, so it's kind of him being here in spirit. But yes, so as you can see behind me, there is Ogrodzieniec Castle. It's about to open. And then from here, I'm going to be a little bit cheeky and cut 10 kilometers off the route by taking a bus to Pilica and the next castle, because effectively, well, I'm learning that if you try to do absolutely everything, unless you're in like absolute peak physical condition, you're probably going to break something. And certainly my back, my ankles, my legs, my feet, they're all feeling the pressure after several days on this trip. So hope you enjoy. Plenty of castles in today's journey, as well as some cool natural sights as always. Dzień dobry and welcome to A Brit in Poland. With this channel, I travel across the country, I bring you the culture, and I show you just how amazing Poland is. So I invite you on my journey. If you want to see more, I have Facebook and Instagram profiles, which you will find links to in the description below. And if you want to really help out, you can turn to my Patreon or Patronite accounts, again in the description. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy this video. Please like, share and subscribe. Do zobaczenia. The previous evening, after walking another 25 kilometers, I had reached Ogrodzieniec with just enough energy to find a kebab and a room, although apparently not a towel. The castle I had spent all day walking towards was still sitting above the town. I simply had nothing left in me to climb up and explore it. So, early the following morning, I came back. Even before the gates opened, Ogrodzieniec was already making an impression. The square beneath the ruins was guarded by a giant black dog, surrounded by ghostly figures inspired by the legends said to haunt the castle above. Subtle it was not. At 9 o'clock, the gates opened, and after leaving my backpack safely at the ticket office, I finally went inside the largest and most dramatic castle on the entire route. Ogrodzieniec began as a medieval stronghold, built in stone during the reign of Kazimierz the Great in the 14th century. But what survives today is the result of several different versions of the castle being built on top of one another. Later owners, particularly the wealthy Bona family, expanded the fortress into an enormous Renaissance residence, using the natural limestone as part of the structure itself. The castle was not simply placed on this hill. In places it seems to grow directly out of it. By now, Kazimier's defensive chain had followed me through much of the trail. Olsztyn, Mirov, Bobolica, Bąkowiec, and several ruins that required slightly more imagination. Ogrodzieniec was the grandest expression of that idea. Even as a ruin, it felt less like a single castle and more like an entire settlement suspended above the landscape. The visitor route took me through courtyards, chambers, defensive passages, and the old prison tower. Fortunately, the ticket office had allowed me to leave my backpack behind. After carrying it for 3 days, climbing stairs without my temporary household attached to me felt almost indecently easy.
My legs were still carrying yesterday's 25 kilometers. However, Ogrodzieniec contains rather a lot of stairs for a building that has technically been ruined for several centuries. The castle's exhibitions also helped restore some of the life behind the stone. This had not been only a military position, it became a noble home, with kitchens, private room, medicine, storage, and all the ordinary machinery required to keep a great residence functioning. It is easy to look at ruins and imagine nothing but sieges and knights. In reality, most of the people who lived here probably spent far more time worrying about food, illness, and household supplies than enemy armies. Ogrodzieniec's decline came through war, fire, and abandonment. It was heavily damaged during the Swedish deluge and never fully recovered. Later owners gradually left. Local people reused some of the stone, and the residence became the dramatic shell that survives today. Eventually, it was secured as a permanent ruin, rather than reconstructed into somebody's idea of what a medieval castle ought to look like. The reward for all those stairs was the view. Ogrodzieniec stands on Góra Janosskiego, the highest point of the Kraków-Czestochowa upland, more than 500 meters above sea level. From the upper sections, the landscape opened across the Jura in every direction. And after 3 days of seeing these limestone hills from below, I was finally standing above them. It was easy to understand why the castle had become the great landmark of the trail. Olsztyn had felt atmospheric. Mirov and Bobolica had looked almost theatrical together. But Ogrodzieniec had scale. It was the sort of place that could survive becoming a ruin and somehow grow more dramatic in the process. Beside the castle was an outdoor miniature park containing models of fortresses from across the region. After walking between the real versions for several days, it was useful to see the whole network gathered together, although my ankles strongly preferred this more compact edition of the Eagle's Nest Trail. I also bought some Pokémon cards here from one of the vendors outside the castle, and they later turned out to be fake. So, after surviving the longest day of the trail and climbing the Jura's largest castle, I was finally defeated by counterfeit Pikachu. Ogrodzieniec had been worth coming back for, but spending the morning there also confirmed the decision I had made the night before. Walking the entire remaining distance to Klucze would have meant another day of more than 30 kilometers, beginning only after the castle opened. The timing and increasingly my body had other ideas. So the first time on this journey, I traded the red trail markers for a bus and headed towards Pilica. For the first time on the trail, I had let somebody else cover part of the distance. The bus to Pilica was driven by the kind of properly local driver who appeared to know everyone along the route and greeted half of them without noticeably reducing his speed. He drove like a man possessed, but he got me there quickly. A few minutes later, I was walking through Pilica, a quiet market town with one particularly intriguing landmark, a large private palace sitting just beyond the centre. The driver deposited me in the centre of Pilica, a small market town that felt considerably calmer once the bus had disappeared into the distance. I took a quick walk around the square before heading towards the town's palace, which looked intriguingly enough on the map to justify a small detour. The palace and its surrounding park had once belonged to several prominent noble families, but today the complex is privately owned and maybe a bit neglected. From outside, it appeared that access might be possible. The signs, however, mentioned private property and dogs. I had met one legendary black dog that morning. I decided not to investigate the real ones. So my grand tour of Pilica Palace ended at the gate, and I continued through the town instead, past houses, shops, and the quieter streets leading towards its edge. Before long, the buildings began to fit out. The road gave way to forest, and I was back on foot towards Smoleń. The route out of Pilica passed briefly through the forest before opening into wide fields. The weather had changed too. After the cloud and rain of the first few days, it was becoming warmer and sunnier, and the whole landscape seemed to open up with it. Across the fields, sitting alone above the countryside, was Smolen Castle. Small from a distance, but impossible to miss. It seemed to be waiting on the hill for my approach. There was no dramatic reveal engineered by a tourist board. The trail simply stepped out of the forest, and the castle was there. At the foot of the hill, I found a bench, and waited for a large group of school children to complete their visit. After several days on the trail, I had developed a sophisticated new sightseeing strategy. Sit down whenever the opportunity presents itself. Once the path had cleared, I bought my ticket, and for the second time that morning was allowed to leave my backpack at the ticket office. Apparently, the greatest luxury available on the Eagle's Nest Trail was not fine dining or comfortable accommodation. It was climbing a hill without carrying several days of possessions on your back. Smoleń, also known as Pilica Castle, was built during the 14th century as the seat of the powerful Topor family. Unlike many of the royal fortresses along the trail, this was particularly a noble stronghold, associated with Otto of Pilica, one of the most influential figures at the court of Kazimierz the Great. The castle developed around a tall circular tower on the rocky summit, with two lower sections spreading down either side of the hill. Today, the surviving walls are less extensive than Ogrodzieniec's, but the ruins feel more intimately connected to the landscape. Forest presses against the stone, paths climb between the walls, and the entire fortress seemed balanced on the limestone beneath it. Over the centuries, the owners gradually abandoned Smoleń in favour of a more comfortable palace. It was later damaged by artillery during the First World War, and parts of the already weakened walls continued to collapse long afterwards. What remains feels less like a managed monument and more like something the forest is slowly reclaiming. The main attraction was the surviving tower. Smoleń stands on a forested hill more than 450 metres above sea level, and from the top the view stretched across the fields and wooded ridges of the Jura. The tower is widely regarded as offering one of the finest panoramas on the entire Eagle's Nest route. Ogrodzieniec had overwhelmed through scale. Smoleń worked differently. It was smaller, quieter, and far less theatrical, but standing above the forest in the afternoon sun, it delivered one of the most beautiful views of the journey. Eventually, I made my way back down, collected the backpack I had been successfully pretending did not exist, and returned to the trail towards Bydlin. After collecting my backpack, I returned to the rolling countryside that had defined much of the day. The trail rose and fell through open fields, with long views across the Jura under increasingly warm afternoon sun. Somewhere along the day, I crossed paths again with the other hiker following roughly the same route. We exchanged another dzień dobry before continuing separately. By now, our friendship was developing at a perfectly respectable Polish hiking pace. Eventually, the fields narrowed and the trail disappeared back into the forest. And there, standing alone among the trees, I found a cross. At first, there was little to explain why it was there, but nearby stood a circular stone structure that looked like an old well, evidence that this was apparently an empty clearing, had once contained something more. The information board supplied the missing history. This had once been the Psachskia Forester's Lodge during 1944. Its kitchen was used by the Home Army's Surowiec partisan unit, while its soldiers lived in a forest camp built around the clearing under the command of Gerard Woźnica, known by the pseudonym Hardy. The lodge itself has disappeared. What remains is the cross, the information boards, and what appears to be its old well. It was a tiny historical investigation in the middle of the walk. First the memorial, then the clue, finally the explanation. It was also exactly the kind of place I would never have discovered by travelling the castles by car. From there, the path dropped into the Dolina Wodanse, a narrow, wooded valley that felt completely different from the exposed hills above. Despite its name referring to water, the valley is largely dry. The limestone beneath it allows water to drain underground rather than forming a permanent stream. It was cooler beneath the trees, with steep banks rising on either side, and the path winding through the bottom of the gorge. After the castles, open fields, and unexpected livestock, it felt like entering another landscape entirely. The valley also carried an invisible boundary. Somewhere along its floor, I left the Silesian voivodeship and crossed into Lesser Poland. There was no sign or ceremonial gateway, just forest, limestone, and another red trail marker. The valley itself lies along the boundary between the two regions. The other hiker appeared once again, another Dzień dobry. Our relationship had now survived an entire voivodeship. Beyond the gorge, the trail continued towards Bydlin, and the next castle of the route. Visually, it would be far more modest than Ogrodzieniec or Smoleń. Historically, however, the hill had witnessed considerably more than its surviving walls initially suggested. First recorded in the 14th century, Bydlin began as a fortified noble residence overlooking an important frontier route. From the trail, however, that history was not immediately obvious. What survived was essentially a rectangular stone shell, 4 substantial walls standing quietly among the trees. Bydlin did not remain only a castle. It was later converted into a church, then served an Arian congregation during the Reformation, before returning once again to Catholic worship. It was damaged during the Swedish invasion, partially rebuilt, and eventually abandoned, meaning that these 4 walls had served as a fortress, a Protestant place of worship, and a Catholic church before finally becoming a ruin. Visually, it was not another Ogrodzieniec, but for 4 surviving walls, they had lived a remarkably busy life. And the hill's military story did not end with the castle. In November 1914, the area around Bydlin and nearby Krzyżow-Płoty became a battlefield between Russian forces and Austro-Hungarian troops that included the Polish legions. Remnants of their trenches still survive around the castle hill. Medieval fortress above, First World War trenches below. 2 very different conflicts preserved within the same small patch of forest. Somewhere beyond the ruins, I crossed paths once more with my increasingly familiar fellow hiker, another Dzień dobry. By this point we had shared several castles, a gorge, and an entire voivodeship without learning one another's names. It was a beautifully uncomplicated friendship. The trail then returned to the forest, and the day resumed its increasingly unusual behaviour. First came a cowboy. Then came a horse apparently preparing for a second career as a zebra. After the counterfeit Pokémon cards and the forgotten partisan lodge, I had stopped expecting the Jura to explain itself. The ground also began to change. Between the trees, the trail became noticeably paler and sandier, the first small preview of the landscape waiting for me the following morning. After 4 days of limestone hills and medieval ruins, the trail was beginning to hint at something completely different. Eventually, I reached Ogrodzieniec and left the main trail behind. My hotel was in Klucze, which meant following a long road away from the official route. I filmed very little of this section, partly because the road offered very little to film, and partly because my creative ambitions had narrowed considerably towards finding a bed. By then, the fatigue was no longer limited to my heels. My ankles and back were beginning to join the conversation, and neither had anything particularly constructive to contribute. Fortunately, the road eventually delivered the best hotel of the entire journey. After the towel-free accommodation in Ogrodzieniec, this felt almost indecently luxurious. A comfortable room, an excellent meal, and several extremely well-earned drinks. It had been a day of haunted castles, fake Pokémon cards, a local bus driven at questionable speeds, a forgotten wartime lodge, a zebra horse, 2 very different castle ruins, and 1 exceptionally committed exchange of Dzień dobry. It had all fitted between breakfast and cocktails. The following morning, the castles would disappear completely. Waiting just outside Klucze was one of the strangest landscapes in Poland, the blend of desert. That episode and the remainder of this journey will continue on Rumble. You'll find the link to my Brit and Poland channel in the description and the pinned comment below. And if my YouTube channel survives, please subscribe and like. Otherwise, I hope to see you in the future.